Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us. And thanks to Faye for helping to put together this webinar and for hosting. I'm actually going to hand it over to Rosalind Runia here in a second. My name is Jamie Winterton. I'm the Senior Director of Research Strategy at the Global Security Initiative. Rosalind's the Assistant Director of Research at GSI. And I'll hand it over to Rosalind to tell you what a GSI is and why it matters to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Jamie. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending our presentation all about the Department of Defense, or here now we'll just say the DOD, and a little bit more about the Global Security Initiative, which we'll also call GSI. All right. So like Jamie mentioned, she's the Senior Director of Strategy, and I work with her under her as the Assistant Director of Research. So we help all things research in GSI. Global Security Initiative was established in 2015, so we're going on year 8. We have about 170 plus affiliates, faculty affiliates from all academic units. In GSI, we have about 41 employees, and we work to sustain this $34 million research portfolio, and that was from FY21. And awesomely enough, our HERD expenditures for the DOD have increased about 73% over the last 2 years. So we've actually done a lot of focused driven work to increase this number. So how we engage across the Arizona State University landscape, but we also continuously do landscape development and analysis with our Department of Defense sponsors. So that's a big part of what we do at GSI. We're able to bring that expertise knowledge from the DOD to build relationships and maintain those relationships to sustain the project over the life of the project, but then also for future follow-ons. So we are keenly in depth, we have that in-depth understanding of what these needs are. So we're able to also help the faculty develop their concepts for the DOD and help you frame your awesome ideas to help their operational needs. So GSI also helps out with proposal management. We have an amazing pre-award team who are there to help you through all of the nicks and nannies of the DOD, because it is a little bit more intense. And then we also help with our execution of projects. So today we'll be going over what is the DOD, what do their funding announcements look like, how are their proposal phases, and post-award best practices. So once you win that award, what are the best practices to manage that project? We'll go ahead and do a quick recap and then have time for some questions and answers at the end. So what is the DOD, and why and how to work with the DOD, and how do you craft your approach? So for the DOD, there are many different sponsors, and our main highlighted ones is DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. What is the Department of Defense? Well, they have one of the largest budgets in the nation, and that is about $740 billion that goes towards the nation's defense budget. There's about almost 3 million people that they employ, and over 4,800 sites in over 160 countries. So where does research happen? So these are the main people that we look at: the Office of Naval Research, ONR, the Army Research Office and Laboratory, Air Force Research Laboratory, our Air Force Office of Scientific Research, the DARPA, like I just mentioned. And then on the intelligence side, the IARPA is for the intelligence community. And just for overall completeness, the Marine Corps is rolled up to the Navy, the Coast Guard is part of Department of Homeland Security, and then the Space Force is mainly through the AFRL, which is the Air Force Research Laboratory. So this is a great graphic that really explains the different cultures of NSF, NIH, and DARPA, and how DARPA does differ from the NSF and NIH world. So I think this is an awesome picture of how to kind of visualize DARPA. And so as you can tell in the orange, their support is really throughout the life of the project. So they start from the basic phase all the way through development. They want to be there hand in hand with you. So why does this work so well? It works because it's a high risk, high reward. So they want to fail fast and fail hard so you can imagine what that looks like to make it work. And so that's why it's more focused on the entrepreneurial aspects. And then as of the PI, where like NSF, NIH are more talking about the kind of like a ramp into the project. And this is ramp up right away with the DOD.
I have found, if you don't mind me interrupting you,
Absolutely.
people either love this chart or they hate this chart. I personally love this chart. If you hate it, that's okay. It'll be gone in just a second. But the point of this chart, if you have worked with NIH and NSF, thank you, Eva. If you worked with NSF and NIH, then it will help you understand the difference between DARPA and the agencies that you're more used to. That DARPA wants you to take more risks, far more risks than the NIH or NSF are comfortable with. They're way more interested in what is your fundamental research idea and how does it solve their problems than they are your particular credentials. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more when we start to dig into, how do you introduce yourself and how do you propose? How do you highlight these kind of things so a group like DARPA will look at you and go, yes, you're the person that I want to work with. Rosalind, thank you for letting me interrupt you.
You can interrupt as much as you want.
Thank you, I will.
Okay. So how does research happen in the DOD? This is obviously very much a simplification of the list, but we can just go through the overview highlights. So we first want to identify how your research can help. What Jamie and I really are in tune with is what the operational needs of the DOD are. So how can we match your research with what they're looking for? And then, so how do we do that? We find a program manager or the program officer, and then that's the area that they're looking to develop. So we would send an introductory email and keep it very brief, clear, concise. They are very busy. And sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes you can ask for a follow-up meeting. Phone is good, in person is better. Of course, a lot of these people are in the DC area, so in person might be a little difficult, but taking advantage of those opportunities really does help connect the face to the name and to your research. And they'll give you feedback. So listen to their feedback, and then that can help you adapt your overall pitch to them. And then another area is to request for seed funding or other opportunities to engage. So if this one area didn't work, or this one project idea didn't work, how can we reuse that to make other opportunities happen? As an example, let's talk about DARPA. DARPA is one of our biggest sponsors here in GSI, so we love to talk about them. Let's see here. So DARPA is about 220 government employees. They have 6 technical offices, and they're really here to invest in breakthrough technologies for national security. So through that, they have about 100 program managers to develop those pivotal areas. And then they employ about the 250 research and development programs to make that stuff happen. So here are the 6 overview of the technical offices that they have. They have the Defense Sciences Office, the Biological Technologies Office, I2O, we call them, Information Innovation Office, the Microsystems Technology, Strategic Technology, and Tactical. So as you can read the various areas.
And we at the university tend to work with those first 4. So the fundamental research, that is a great match for the university, tends to happen in DSO, BTO, ITO, MTO. STO and TTO, I don't know what we don't call them STO, but everybody does that. STO and TTO tend to be more applied. They're working more towards prototypes and implementation, but still looking at the kinds of work that they do in there. It's not impossible for us to be pitching and succeeding in these areas. But knowing which office your best fit is will really help you navigate. Thanks, Roz.
Yep. All right. So how does research happen? So breaking it down, identify how your research can help. So really it's highlighting the critical area of what it is. So my research is in materials and manufacturing. My work in simulating novel composite materials could help the DOD design structures with greater strength and flexibility. Yes. Find a program manager who cares. So on DARPA's website and like many other DOD sponsors, they have these areas of interest, and they have the lists of who the program managers are and the program officers. So you can see where you can direct your messaging. And so here's an example of what that looks like in greater detail. So as Jamie mentioned, the various offices, defense sciences, biological technologies. And so we can see which match would be best for you.
Roz, are these program managers going to be at DARPA forever?
No. So the great thing about DARPA is they really focus on that innovation. So a program manager will be there for 4 years. They have 4 years to develop their research ideas, and then, they have right when they get in, they develop their research ideas. They spend about 6 to 9 months developing those concepts, doing the landscape development, and then they finally pitch their idea to the S&T board, the Science and Technology Board, and then that's when the program will be announced. So is that good?
You're muted.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was like, wait.
I just talking to myself. Sorry. Yeah. So the reason that I asked for that is if you look at these particular folks and think, oh, that person's for me, then we made these slides like a year ago. So you might want to go and say, are they still at DARPA? Because DARPA program managers roll off in 4 years. But also they're adding new program managers all the time.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay, so an introductory email could look something like this. Who you are, where you're from, obviously Arizona State University, and really what is the highlight of your approach to what they're looking for. So short and sweet, there's about 4 sentences here, and that's how we would send that email. Wait, what? What's a quad chart?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, Roslyn. I would be happy to talk about what a quad chart is. I will pause and answer Faye's question in the chat. How far in advance do we know what the PM's priorities are? When a program manager is hired, they come in and they have their page set up at darpa.mil, and you can look and see, all right, here are some things that they say they're interested in. Sometimes it's really specific and you can tell like, all right, I get a good sense of where they're going. Sometimes it will say things like, to develop novel technologies in cybersecurity. That's not very informative. A lot of times what that means is they're going to make a classified program and it's probably not going to be something that we're well suited for anyway. So that's a good way to get the first idea. I mean, also kind of figure out where were they before they were at DARPA? What kind of research were they doing? Sometimes people come from academia and have publication records. Program managers are experts in their field. That's why they're selected for those positions. So there's usually some kind of, history of where they've been and what they've been doing. But like sending them a note, like what we're going to talk about here, to say, hey, this is what I think you're interested in. Am I right? they want to engage, and then you can hear more about where they really want to go and some of the questions that they have for you and start to build that relationship. Faye, did that help? I hope so. I'm going to assume yes. And if not, you can ask me again. Thank you, Bob. I felt that Pepper had, really made some contributions, and it was time for her to enter the academy. So this is an example of a quad chart. There are different templates, and we can send out a template for a quad chart to those folks here. I also just want to plug the fact that we'll be doing a series of webinars on some of the topics that we're addressing today, like finding the right program manager, like putting together a quad chart, like answering the Heilmeyer questions, which we'll get into in a couple of slides. So Christina, if you're online, if we have a description of that we can pop into the chat, fantastic. If it's not there yet, that's okay. We can send it out to the folks that attended and registered for that today. All right, back on track. Let's talk about quad charts. Quad charts are like the secret handshake of the DOD universe. Program managers must make quad charts in order to sell their programs to tech council. And so if you can put together a quad chart that talks about your research, it tells them a couple things. One, I care about the things that you need to do to develop your program. And two, I know enough about the DoD to make this. So you can trust me with the kinds of work that we'll be hopefully doing together in the future. So the objective here, promote mission success and warfighter health through greater understanding of wearable monitoring device capability and optimal ConOps. Note that our objective is very DoD centric. So Heather is a professor, her line is split between SFIS and Nursing and Health Solutions. Her motivation to do research is to understand more the kind of health indicators that could be measured with these devices, but she wants to put this in terms of something that the DoD will resonate with, which is the mission success and the warfighter health. People will ask us sometimes, well, how do I know how to do this? And what's a ConOps? And how are you coming up with this weird stuff? It's basically because I've literally been doing this for almost 20 years, which is a number I'm not comfortable with, but that's what it is. So we can help basically take the idea that you have, frame it in a way that the DoD will understand it, put in some of those little DoD highlights like ConOps, concept of operations. We don't talk like that in the civilian world, but DoD is all about the ConOps. So it's these kind of things that we can help build in. So a quick description of the effort. You're going to ask them for money. Can't do anything. Well, we could do stuff for free, but it's not very valuable most of the time. What would we like to do to achieve the objective? The benefits of the proposed technology going top to bottom. Again, thinking about this from the DoD's perspective. And what are the challenges? This is something that we'll again touch on in the Heilmeyer questions, but a realistic assessment of why is this hard? Because if it wasn't hard, somebody would have done it already, and you wouldn't need to, you in your position as a researcher wouldn't need to be doing it. You're not interested in easy problems. You're interested in hard and interesting and challenging ones. Thinking through why this is hard is really important in building trust for the Department of Defense. Back up to the top right, there is a graphic. There's always a graphic. Please don't replace it with a bunch of tiny fonts. The DoD likes its pictures. And so we'll help to put together what kind of an image makes sense. And it just depends on what your research is. How, maybe if you're coming from the biological sides, it's some kind of like, what does the assay process look like? What does the data collection process look like? I'm working on a quad chart with a professor right now who's doing material science for solar cell development. And so we have a great graphic talking about like, hey, this is the process that we go through. And then here are the novel pieces of it that make it different from what's already out there. Then in the bottom right-hand corner, if we're going to ask for funding, we should ask for a certain amount and over a certain period of time. I usually recommend we go for something around 3 years. 3.5 million is maybe a little higher than I would recommend, but we can scope that depending on what you want to accomplish. This is going to a particular customer that was interested in around this range. The period of performance, 36 months, and how to get in touch. This quad chart is the first step. It is unlikely that they'll be like, looks good, have some money. But it's a great introduction to you and the work that you want to do. And if we can get into a conversation, the program manager will often ask questions like, well, okay, but have you considered just maybe changing something a little bit or a different type of application? And now you're helping them to build a future program, which sets you up really nicely for seed funding. So quad charts, again, we're going to have a whole session on quad charts that you should sign up for, and we can help review your quad charts. But this is kind of the first taste of this, what it looks like. So you're not freaked out by it if you see it in the future. All right, next chart. All right, I've alluded to the Heilmeier questions a couple of times already because they are one of my favorite things to talk about. The Heilmeier questions are a set of questions that was invented by George H. Heilmeier. He was a director of DARPA in the late 70s. And it's how DARPA still evaluates the proposals that they receive today. In fact, it's how program managers at DARPA have to build their programs. They have to answer these questions when they're building their programs as well. And so we anchor things here because it is a concrete set of questions. They look simple, but they can be tricky once you dig into them. And once you can really answer the Heilmeier questions, then you're ready to approach a Department of Defense sponsor, even if it's not DARPA. Other groups in the DOD will use these as well because they're very useful. So that first question, what are you trying to do? This is the objective. What are you trying to do for the DOD? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? State it as simply as possible and frame it in a way that the Department of Defense will say, yes, this is our problem. This isn't an NSF or NIH or some other kind of funder's problem. We can help with that kind of frame. The second piece is one that people tend to miss. I would say I review maybe 50 proposals a year. And if I were going to pick a weak Heilmeier question out of all of those proposals, it would be the second one here. How is it done today and what are the limits of current practice? People love to skip over this and talk about what they're going to do, which what you're going to do is great. That's coming up in number 3. But first set the scene. How is this problem being solved right now? What are the problems with it? And then really show here's the current state of the art, but what I'm proposing is revolutionary, not evolutionary, to quote DARPA. And here's how I'm going to go through these metrics that I set up in talking about current practice and do a much better job than is currently being done for this problem. Number 3, what's new in your approach and why do you think it will be successful? If you do a good job talking about number 2, like what are the limits of current practice, then you've set yourself up perfectly here to talk about, well, here's why everything I'm doing is going to be way better than what those guys are doing. And I'm going to be successful because, either you have the experience or you have a great idea or you have access to certain kind of machinery or data. Figure out what's unique about your approach and make sure that you highlight it. You don't want them to be like, this is a great idea, I should go fund that person. No, you want them to fund you. Number 5, if you're successful, what difference will it make? What impact will success have and how will it be measured? This is a fantastic opportunity to set up how you want to be graded. If you want to, if there are certain things that you are going to try to achieve during your research trajectory, then being able to say, this is how I want to be measured is very powerful. We all know that research trajectories change, right? If research was a simple A to B, then I think a lot of us wouldn't be here, That's not the interesting and exciting piece of research. So it's okay if your research trajectory changes. We have a PI at ASU, Dan Bliss, who's done a lot of work with DARPA, and he likes to say, if your DARPA project ends in the same way that you proposed it, then it shouldn't have been a DARPA project in the first place. These funders understand that fundamental research will evolve and change. So don't be too worried about putting down how you would like to be measured. You just need to have something reasonable here. Number 6, what are the risks and the payoffs? We talked about this a little on the quad chart in like, what are the challenges? What are the hard parts? What are the risks is not necessarily like my biological health people are always thinking about like FDA compliance and what are the risks to a person. That's not quite what they're asking. They're asking what are the risks to the proposed research trajectory? What are the hard parts? Talk about how you're going to address those, and they will really appreciate that. It sounds a little funny, but the DOD gets a lot of proposals that say there are no risks, everything is going to be perfect. And that's just not reasonable. That's not a good way to start to build trust. So by answering this question, honestly, you can put yourself head and shoulders above a lot of other folks. How much will it cost and how long will it take? 8 and 9. That's just, kind of some budgeting and planning kinds of things. And then what are the midterm and final exams to check for success? How will progress be measured? It's kind of a rehashing of question 5, really, is what does success look like? And then what can you say that you will do at the end of the first year, at the end of the second year, at the end of the third year, or whatever milestones you decide are appropriate for your research trajectory. The Heilmeyers are really important, and that's part of why I love talking about them, is if you can get a good handle on these for a project that you want to propose, then you have a really excellent chance, because you're basically using the rubric that the Department of Defense has bought into for decades to guide the way you talk about your project. And we'll be having a session exclusively on the Heilmeyers. So if you want to hear a lot more, then I think that's coming up in June. I don't know when. Christina posted it in the chat. All right, so reaching out. Sometimes people will reach out and they'll be like, I didn't hear back. They hate me. They don't hate you. They get so much email. If you think of 100 program managers at DARPA to a ratio of how many, not just faculty members, but researchers in industry and people that are bombarding them all the time and wanting to talk, not to mention managing the programs that they're currently running, then that's a lot of email. I usually will try 3 times. Using that template that we put together that Roz talked through, reaching out a couple of times. Usually after time 3, it's either like, okay, either you are blowing me off or you're really too busy for this conversation, so I'll move my attentions elsewhere. If they do respond and say, well, we're not really interested in this right now, you can ask them, it's actually an opportunity. Is there something that you think would be better? Is there something that you would change? Or is this just not your area of interest? And is there somebody else that I should talk to? That second question gets a lot of response, I've found. They're like, oh, yeah, this isn't me, but somebody that I know down the hall could be really interested in this. Then they'll make a connection for you, and that's even better than going in cold. Another reason that they don't say anything is they could be really close to launching a program. And once a program manager gets to a certain concept maturity, there's not a lot they can say, particularly if a BAA or a broad agency announcement is about to come out. Then they are restricted, because if they answer a question for you, then once that BAA is out, they are legally obligated to answer it for everyone that asks. So that could be one reason for silence, and sometimes you have to just kind of infer that. Or they could just be committed to another direction, and that's okay. We have talked a lot about DARPA, but we do almost the exact same thing for Office of Naval Research, for Air Force Research Lab, for the Army Research Lab. These groups don't have the program manager changeover every 4 to 5 years like DARPA does. So you'll find folks that have been in program officer positions for decades sometimes in these particular groups. But it's a very similar pattern. You can look and see, all right, what are they doing and who might I match up with well? If you look through these resources and you find somebody, feel free to ask us about it. Like, hey, have you heard of Dr. So-and-so over in Office of Naval Research? We may not know that person, but we might, and we might be able to say, oh, yeah, and they're working on something that's interesting and you might want to know about it. Or we might say, yeah, they're really challenging to work with. They may not be a good fit from a personality perspective. We'll be very honest about that. Everything is in the DOD is so focused on relationships that it's important to have a good relationship from the university side as well as from the sponsor side. It really needs to be a mutual pursuit. Okay. So we talked about how does research happen in the DOD, and we talked about like, how do you get involved? I guess the technical answer for how does research happen is a call will come out. Either it's a broad agency announcement with a very specific scope, like it's a program on a certain topic. Each one of these organizations and each one of the DARPA offices has what's called a long range or open BAA. This basically says, here, we're interested in a lot of things that we may not have programs on right now, but here's a way that you can send us the quad chart or white paper, depending, and we can talk about it. I definitely recommend, though, reaching out to a program manager or program officer instead of just firing things off to long range BAAs. Because if you just send something to a long range BAA and no one's on the other side expecting it, it will get assigned to someone randomly. And you might have a great material science proposal that gets sent over to a cognitive psychologist who says, I don't care about this. So young investigator programs are great to talk about. And I know Faye's team runs an event every year where they talk about all the different kinds of young investigator programs, not just in the DOD, but broadly. And then there are specific pots of money for small businesses and tech transfers and things like that. So knowing that there are different kinds of categories, let's jump into talking about proposals here. So there's a lot. A typical BAA from DARPA will be about 50 or 60 pages long. Some of that will be, here's the setup of the program, here's what we want to achieve, here are the technical requirements. Some of that will be, here's how you submit it. Some of it will be about cage codes and things that like your RA will know about. So we always recommend, if you're thinking that you're going to propose to something, just loop in an RA, even if you're pretty sure that's what you're going to do, just loop somebody in so they know what you're doing. And they can start to get a lot of these things in order, because these proposals are pretty intense. Most funders have something at the pre-proposal stage where they'll do an abstract or a short white paper, so you don't have to put in all the work for a big proposal. But the big proposals, they do take a lot of work. So yeah, that's a lot of words. Let's skip past this. That chart's giving me anxiety. So reading all of this, it's gonna get an extra cup of coffee. I know it's gonna be boring, but go through it and figure out like, okay, am I able to compete for all of this? Is there, you don't want to put together a whole proposal and then realize, oh, this was actually for a small business. Like that's a real bummer. And that, again, another reason to loop in an RA is they can kind of help you look for some of those things. What are the important details? Is there a pre-proposal requirement, or is it a suggestion? We usually say you should definitely do the pre-proposal. You can get some quality feedback on your full submission. And things for like you must or you should, they really mean it. This is not the place to get creative. DOD really loves formats and specifics, and these calls will be rife with them. So just take them seriously. Yep, there's a lot of specific details that they want, that they could be pretty specific about. So just making sure that what you submit is compliant. All right, next. Okay, so proposal phase, let's go to the next one here. There's a lot of places to find these funding announcements. Honestly, I put together a Google search, just a Google alerts that will ping me anytime something happens with DARPA. But you probably don't want that level of input into your life. So you might want to put together a Google alert that has some of these sponsor names and your particular research interests so you can see when things are coming out. Going to the sponsor announcements, We do have some resources at ASU that gather some of these. So there's Pivot, there's the funding.asu.edu. And our team also keeps tabs on what's coming out from these sponsors on a regular basis. Okay, next. Teaming is really important. I generally recommend if you're going to go for a large pursuit, like not just a single investigator award, that you bring in people that are not just from ASU. It looks good to the sponsor. It shows some collaboration. And there are very few big projects that ASU can do completely in-house. That bringing in experts from other places to have a heterogeneous team is what I always recommend. Build your team early and figure out who's going to do what. And then think about what kind of staff you might want on the project. Are there software engineers, research scientists, project coordinators, program managers that you need? The bigger the program it is, the more strongly I recommend that you have somebody come in as a coordinator or a manager, because DARPA will fund some really interesting research and fund some really, they'll give you high levels of funding, but also they require a lot of handholding. They want to know about budget updates at least once a month. They need to be invoiced once a month. There's a lot of boxes to check with them. And so having somebody from the staff side to help with this is lets you focus on the research and do what you need to do. Okay. All right, so I think we talked through a lot of these. Contact your RA. We really can't say it enough. Do it soon. Know what the sponsor's looking for. Read through the RFP. Figure out what your timeline is. This is something where if we are doing, GSI is doing proposal management, then we'll have a timeline set up. There are a lot of things that have to be done in a proposal that aren't just writing the technical narrative. So this ORSPA deadline is 3 days before the sponsor deadline. It's not because we just like those 3 days. It's because there's a lot of important things that happen during that time. So sticking to that timeline is really important. When things get shoved to the right, it can cause some chaos. So thinking about how you're going to run the project, research is great. But if you have a lot of subcontractors, for example, what's your management plan? Or if you're part of a team that includes industry, do you have the right kind of people that are working the connections between academia and industry? And I always recommend having somebody do a review who hasn't seen the concept before, that can look through and say, are you really addressing what the sponsor is looking for here in a way that they will resonate with and be excited about? Okay. So then let's talk about post-award a little bit. Next chart, I think, is, yeah, so you won. Oh, crap. This is going to be a big deal. I mean, it's great that you won, but there's some definitely things to think about when you're running that project, and a smooth pre to post award handoff is really important. So I like this life cycle that our Associate Director of Operations in our Cyber Center put together, Jackie Lefevers. If once you identify that opportunity and submit the proposal, then in the best case scenario, you'll get a notification of award. Contracting happens with our contracting office. And then if ASU is prime and we have subs, then we're going to need to handle the contracting with the subs as well. This is a big stage and it's obnoxious and it's detail oriented, but grants and contracts are there to help out. Then there's that active research stage. You're doing the project, you're coming up with the research, you're reporting back to the sponsor about the great things you did and the money that you spent. And then near the end of that program, you can start to have conversations about what would the next project look like? What are the next steps in this research trajectory that we weren't able to answer in this particular project? And maybe sometimes that's with the same sponsor, or maybe that's with what we call a transition agent or a partner that can help move that research from the fundamental to the applied to the prototype stage. All right, next. We're going to send this out. And so I don't want to keeping an eye on the clock. I don't want to spend too much time on the meeting from pre to post award handoff, but there are some things that you definitely want to touch on in that meeting to make sure that there aren't any assumptions in the pipeline that could come back to bite you later on. Right. And again, with these big projects, having, if you're a researcher, then being able to focus on research and having staff to help support that research and focus on the logistics is extremely powerful. And it ends up in better research than if you were trying to do everything all together. So keep that in mind when you're building your budget and your team. Okay. Let's see, the power of project staff. There's, again, this is probably a good thing to look at once you get these charts later on. But sometimes people go, well, what does project coordinator do for me? Oh my gosh, so many things. And so many things that could be extremely helpful. Knowing the ins and outs of the way ASU does things like invoicing and travel and student hiring and the kinds of reporting that the DOD likes. It's good to think about this when you're putting that project plan together and that budget together. Sometimes people will win something and reach out to me and say, do you have a coordinator? And I have to say, we do not. We have a ton of coordinators, but they are all super busy right now. And I anticipate that they will be because there's just so many DOD projects going on at the university. So think about that early. I love this that Jackie put together. What does the DOD want? Look in the contract. That's what they're bound to. It's what we're bound to. That contract and statement of work is your roadmap to success, and your sponsor will be very happy if you keep them apprised as how you're working towards that. Okay, rinse and repeat. We talked about, you go through this and think about what other kinds of follow-on projects could you create. You start to build a portfolio, and that need for communication builds the more projects you have and the more sponsors you have engaged, but it can be a really rewarding experience. Okay. So this is kind of what we talked about. We talked about what the DOD is and why it matters to you, hopefully. Understanding the funding announcements, the things that they're looking for, what to do in proposals, and then what to do in the post-award phase. And I think we're at a good point here where we can stop the recording and see if folks have questions.